Welcome, everybody. We are standing by for Donald Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, at the top of the hour. I am very, very interested in how she is going to handle questions that some may call nasty about the president's complete lack of leadership in the midst not only of the coronavirus pandemic, but now national unrest. Dozens of cities with protests, confrontations between protesters and looters, police and looters, police and protesters, media getting shot with rubber bullets. Donald Trump, so far, a complete and embarrassing total lack of leadership, sitting at the White House, tweeting about it's essentially like The Simpsons Release the Hounds. Remember that episode? If people used to watch The Simpsons, Smithers Release the Hounds. Trump tweeting, we're going to send vicious dogs after protesters, as well as bloodthirsty Secret Service agents. We put the young ones on the front lines, Donald Trump saying. An embarrassing lack of leadership. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, who's no progressive hero, has actually been tweeting conciliatory things and went out and kneeled with protesters and spoke with protesters to figure out what it is that is going on. And so we can all, as reasonable people, disagree about what the right tactics should be. There is a position which has been the closest to my position for a long time, that if the democratic system is still functioning, rather than destruction of property, we should use that system to get a different mayor in Minneapolis, to put in a different police chief, etc. That being said, I say that from a position of privilege. I understand at this point how things are boiling over, and I have a number of commentaries on my broadcast show today. And I think one other important thing we want to keep in mind as we think about the protests is, protesters are protesting and looters are looting. And we don't even have to get into this game of, is looting a valid form of protest? Don't even let them pull you into these philosophical black holes and semantic vicious circles. Protesters are protesting, and we have video of them from Brooklyn and other places saying, we are not here to engage with the police. We are not here to break the law, period. That's it. You see anybody doing that stuff, you call them out. Separately, you have looters looting, for sure. And it is really important that we not fall into phrases like, the protesters are looting. No, the looters are looting and the protesters are protesting. And there are opportunists here who are trying to take advantage of the situation. In addition, we have to be really careful. This phrase, out of towners, is being used to devalue the purpose of these protests. When you say, as many right-wingers have been saying, these are out of town people coming in, what they're saying is, people aren't genuinely in their community mad about what's going on in their community. They're out of towners, vague provocateurs from out of town. We can't allow that term to also be used to disqualify the validity of why protesters are protesting, of course. Okay, Kayleigh McEnany, scheduled for the top of the hour. Welcome to everybody just joining me. There is some stunning leaked audio of Donald Trump on a call today with governors. These are the rantings of a lunatic. Take a listen to Trump encouraging violence against protesters. Take a listen.
They were Olympic stuff all over the world. They took over the police department. The police were running down the street, sirens blazing, the rest of them running. It was on camera. And then they wiped out. You probably have to build a new one, but I've never seen anything like it. And the whole world was laughing. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor is, I think, on the call, and he's the next one died. And all of a sudden, and I said, you got to use the National Guard in big numbers. They did it first, and they did. And I'll tell you that, I don't know what it was. It was, Governor, it was the third night, fourth night. Those guys walked through that stuff like it was butter. They walked right through, and you haven't had any problems since. I mean, they don't. They're not going to go.
Trump just like gleeful about, riot police and riot gear and I mean, it's crazy.
And now they'll go to some other place. But once you called out and you dominated, you took the worst place and you made it didn't even cover it last night because there was so
Dominating the protesters.
action. Because you dominated. You dominated. Now, what happened to New York, I have to tell you, I live in Manhattan.
That's not true. He famously lives in Florida, supposedly.
What's going on in Manhattan? I have no idea. New York's finest, they got to be allowed maybe to do their job. I don't know what's happening in Manhattan, but it's terrible. And because it's New York, because it's Manhattan, it gets a lot of press. So they really spend a lot of time on it. But New York is got to have to toughen up. And we'll send you National Guard if you want. You have the largest police force in the country, 40,000 people, I understand. But what's going on in New York is terrible.
By the way, Trump seems to have like a New York accent we don't normally hear when he. Anybody else picking up on that?
It's terrible. Of all the places. What went on last night in Los Angeles with the stores and the storefronts is terrible. No domination. You have to dominate. Yeah, go ahead.
You got to dominate him. You got to dominate him. Something I guess Trump knows a thing or two about. I don't know. So there is that, and Donald Trump, that leaked audio there, and we're going to be covering that on the program tomorrow, of course. Let me see what's on people's minds from the standpoint of Twitch and YouTube messages. Over on Twitch, thanks to G-Bell Flowers and Bastafu and Toady Capote for their Twitch Prime subscriptions. A couple of super chats coming in. Nasty Questions says, prediction, Kayleigh will show up later than ever, and the press briefing will be the shortest one yet. She cannot handle nasty questions. Sad. Antonio Jose Franco says, why does low voter turnout hurt Democrats? Is it entirely targeted suppression, or is there also a component of Democratic voters voting less reliably? That's a very complex question. I've addressed that a number of times, and you can check out videos about it on my channel. Casey says, are you going to do a video on the Trump Epstein stuff that's come out, and have you read the documents? I have read the documents. Listen, I talked about Trump being accused of raping a 13-year-old years ago, so to me, none of it is really new. Waller is me says, do you think the protests where people may or may not be wearing masks, may or may not be socially distancing, will give Trump an out if coronavirus cases increase? Yes, Donald Trump is set to blame the protests for coronavirus spikes, which may or may not happen. Thanks to Easy NXT and That's Me 123 for subscribing over on Twitch. Carl Smith says, do you support the protests? What factors do you think led to the escalation to rioting? So, yes, of course. How can I not support something that is protected by the Constitution, the right to peaceably assemble and demand that your concerns be heard? Now, I have never supported physical violence. I have never supported criminality of any kind. And so my position at this point is I still maintain that I am against violence and criminality, and I question whether it will achieve anything. And I sympathize with a degree of desperation over the systems that have failed in the United States, such that I get why we are seeing what we are seeing. And it is not something that I recommend, but I say that knowingly from a position of privilege. And it's extremely important that these issues not be mixed up. I have a 20-minute video that's coming. I don't want to redo it because I just recorded it. It's going to come out later. Anybody who claims to have the enlightened hot take on what this is really about is ignoring something. And what I mean by that is there are people who say this is merely about, this is a race problem in the United States. Others say this is a police brutality problem in the United States. You have others who say this is a capitalism problem in the United States. Capitalism inevitably leads to this in the United States. Others say the problem is militarization of law enforcement. These are all problems. These are all problems. They interact with each other. And we will not really understand what needs to happen if we continue to claim, I know what the real thing is here. It's not those other four things. The real issue is just X or Y or whatever the These are big, big problems, and I hope that I do justice to some of those factors in the video clip that I recorded earlier and will be going up, I think, at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, I am seeing I'm seeing people get the ban hammer dropped on them. That's good because we see a lot of people that are spreading a lot of essentially fomenting violence in the chat. So the moderators are deputized to drop the ban hammer. I want to thank Frozen Pop Tart, Ty Schneids, and Space Invader for supporting on Twitch, where we have a hype train happening right now. Aaron Dadas says over on YouTube, 30-second explanation, Antifa equals terrorists. Is that legal? I don't think so. I don't believe so. So when Trump says we are going to designate Antifa a terrorist group, what he's talking about is the Department of State's foreign terrorist organizations. Antifa is a domestic group with American citizens doing things on U.S. soil. So even though I've been critical of many of their tactics before, designating them, as Trump wants to designate them, a terrorist group would deny them both due process and First Amendment rights. And my understanding is that it would not be constitutional for Trump to do that. Bob 225-ish says things are bad. Downtown Sacramento was ransacked. Horrible. I mean, here in Boston, we are seeing absolutely horrible things take place. Paul Carroll has become a soy boy level member on YouTube, rather. Per Tiren from Sweden says, thank you for being the voice of reason in this trying time. I'm doing my best, my friend, doing my best, and very much appreciate your support. We are standing by for Kayleigh McEnany, McEnna, and Anna, and Annie, as some like to say. I believe it has potentially been pushed to the bottom of the hour, originally scheduled for 5 minutes ago, but that's okay. We're all here, and there is so much to talk about. Matt Chavez says, I really hope all those protesting register and vote blue all the way down. All this will be for nothing if every single person doesn't vote. I agree with you. So here is, again, a lot of this stuff I did on my podcast today. I hope that you guys know, by the way, we do an hour a day free podcast. I mean, it's just free. It's free. Anybody, if you want get the podcast, it's free. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. And in that hour podcast, about 20 minutes today is dedicated to all of the different aspects to what is going on right now. And one of the things that I point out is when you look in history, when these big activism movements get going, which sometimes include tactics and actions that we don't agree with, sometimes include sit-ins and other types of activism, etc. Very often, at the tail end of it, it comes down to a Supreme Court making a decision. A beautiful, perfect example. I had a perfect phone call where we discussed this example earlier. 1954's Brown v. Board of Education decision. Okay, bear with me here. I think this is important. In 1954, the Supreme Court under Earl Warren decided in Brown v. Board of Education, schools at the state level cannot racially segregate. You can't say Alabama will have a black school and a white school. Supreme Court decided that in 1954. Depended on not a 9-0 decision because of the previous presidents who had put people on the court in 1954. They all came together and made this decision. What led to Brown v. Board of Education started, you could argue, in 1951. It started with protests. It started with nonviolent resistance. It started with sit-ins. It started with appealing to elected officials. It started with some protests that we would certainly consider over the line by the same standards that we use today. That was 1951. And then it worked its way through. Activists became elected to local office and court cases started. And next thing you know, it's 1954 and the Supreme Court says Brown v. Board of Education 9-0, school segregation is not legal, period. It is over. So you all know what I'm getting to. Everything that's going on now, let's have a healthy debate about what are the right and wrong tactics. Let's not allow the right to invalidate and disqualify the motivations of the protesters who are protesting. But let's remember that in 2 or 3 years, whatever it is we want as the end goal here may come down to who is on the Supreme Court, who is on different federal benches, judges. And that is going to be determined over the next few years, either by Donald Trump for another 4, if he gets reelected, or by Joe Biden. It's pretty clear who is going to appoint the right people, given the 2 options that we have. Just listen to what Joe Biden's been saying and tweeting over the last 24 hours. He's not perfect. He sponsored the crime bill in 1994. I get it. But the options we have are these, and there is essentially no comparison. So that is my, in the back of all this, let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees, as the term may be. Okay. Other super chats coming in. Let's see here. Sean Sack has subscribed. Pyroplasma, or plasma, as I like to call it. Antifa has no central organization or leadership. Yeah, the idea that Antifa is even a cohesive organization also is a reason why it's hard to put them on any kind of list. But yeah, I get the point. Townsend Cock says Antifa terror designation is crazy and unlikely. Thank God we're a sufficiently enlightened society that level legal heads will prevail when the dust settles. Yeah, Trump said he's going to do it. I don't think he's actually going to do it. He says, I mean, it's red meat. It's throwing red meat out to people. Team ABBC Taekwondo says, would deployment of the military be political suicide? The National Guard has already been deployed. Remember, the National Guard is, they are state National Guards, and many of them have already been deployed. I don't think what's going on now is particularly good for Trump. Trump is presiding over chaos, and he is impotent and flaccid in doing anything to take control of the situation. Casey Bates says, I believe Trump is terrible, but I can't help to feel like I'm just the person that was so anti-Obama in 2008/2012. Was it this bad then with Obama? The hatred of Obama was from people on the left who thought Obama abandoned leftist ideas he ran on, and lunatics on the right who were a combination of, racist, xenophobic, and just extreme libertarians who believe the government doing anything is socialism or communism. So no, it is a very, very different situation. Aaron Dada says MAGA night seemed like a total flop. Womp womp. Yeah, this was so funny. Trump tweeted Saturday night I'm paraphrasing. It was basically just a call for the MAGA supporters to get to the White House in a show of power. Nobody showed up, and then Trump stopped tweeting for 13 hours, the longest he went without tweeting in a long time. Badly, badly embarrassing. Okay, other people supporting on Twitch. Chiroshi is supporting on Twitch. Quakes says, does it make me an asshole if I want to join the protests but don't want to due to coronavirus fears? No. I mean, no, everybody has to make a call, and maintaining social distancing is a relevant priority, and saying it is more important to go and support. So I'm going to wear a mask and, not get people sick or get sick myself. Everybody's got to make the call that is right for them. Pyroplasma, where did that go? Says active duty military deployment is illegal. Oh, okay. So you're talking about not the National Guard, but active duty military. Yes, it is illegal to use the military for domestic law enforcement, is my understanding, which is why it would be against the law for Trump to deploy active duty military to the border, for example. Max says, how does protesting actually pressure for change? Well, listen, it pressures. I'm going to throw something out there. So Fox News Sunday yesterday, Chris Wallace on Fox News did an hour where he interviewed Cornel West, talked about COVID disproportionately affecting people of color, talked about George Floyd and the protests. Does Chris Wallace do that if you don't have protests raging? I don't know that he does. I really don't. I think if you have a totally different Fox News Sunday, if you don't have these protests going on. So I think clearly mass gatherings at urban centers do work and they get attention. I am not supportive of destruction of property. I am obviously not supportive of violence against police officers that are doing nothing. The good police officers. But there's no doubt that these mass gatherings generate attention. No question about it. It's every news channel for the last 4 days. By the way, people have been asking me to do some live streams of the protests. And I am up for doing that, but here's the difficulty I'm having. A lot of the coverage is from local news stations. Local news stations, like the local Fox affiliate, local NBC affiliate, they are the most litigious with copyright. They will immediately shut down my stream with a copyright strike. So if you guys are aware of streams that are just like people, where we could see what's going on and we can have conversations as we are watching, email them to me. It's hard for me to follow it all in all these different platforms. I would be up for doing some of those streams, but my channel will get shut down if I'm restreaming local news, which has been a lot of what is covering the protests. So get in touch with me via email. I would very much appreciate that. Okay, let me say some new member thank yous. I can't thank enough the folks that signed up in May. And I want to remind you, the best way to support these streams and the podcast and the YouTube channel and all of it is grab a membership on my website. It's quick, it's easy. We estimate only 0.5% of our audience currently supports via membership. So you take our total audience, you take 1%, you divide that in half. 0.5% we estimate is the level of a membership support from our viewers. If we could double that to just 1%, it would be a complete game changer for the show. So let me thank some folks who have signed up. Tom Nakayama is new member number 1 today. Barbara Schmidt-Bells is new member number 2. Timothy Marapau is new member number 3. And Vincent Lin is new member number 4 today. Okay, I think I got everybody. You can, I believe paying full price is a beautiful thing, but I understand everybody has a different financial situation. We don't want to turn anybody away. So that coupon code 2020 now chops 66% off of the cost of a membership. It's just $2 a month, or if you pay for the year, it's $1.80. This is very, very little. And if enough people do it, again, if we can just go from 0.5% to 1% of our audience getting a membership, we're golden. Everybody will get a thank you who signs up on my website today. Let's see here. Kevin McComber, what was wrong with the crime bill? It's a 26-year-old bill. It's been years since I did an analysis of it, so you'd have to check out my clips on it. I'm not ready to do a full analysis of the crime bill right now. Dodging Rain says, been watching some protest police unity videos since the corporate media keeps covering the violent sides. Yeah, there's no shortage of videos where we actually are seeing unity between protesters and police. You love to see it. You love to see it. The problem, of course, is that there's a lot of other things going on as well. Kurt Belanger says Trump wants elements of domination. Yeah, we played that clip earlier. GK says, do you feel a sense of derealization during all of this sometimes? Absolutely. I mean, it's been 3 months. We've been in quarantine. We now have violent confrontations happening across the entire country, protesters being hit with bullets, rubber bullets, media being hit with rubber bullets, media being arrested. You have looting, you have rioting, you have destruction of property, you have protesters who are saying, hey guys, we're here to protest. We are not here to engage with police. We are not here to break any laws. Call it out when you see it. You are seeing police join protesters. You're seeing police ram protesters with vehicles. We're seeing everything. And this is why it's so tough. You know, a lot of people, it's a way to get clicks is if I was just tweeting all day about some grand unifying theory about what's going on here, if I pretended this is all about race, or this is all about economics, or this is all about corruption, or this is all about police brutality, you can get clicks and build an audience that way. It's just dishonest because this is about many things. And I took 20 minutes on my podcast today. The podcast will be out very, very soon. The video clip will be out much later. I took 20 minutes to go through a bunch of the different factors that are at play here. And you know what? The clip won't do that well on YouTube, and a lot of people will be bored with it. But it's what has to be done because these are far more complex issues than anybody with a this is the issue sort of hot take is presenting, and that's not what I want to do. Okay. Tyler Schneider says, fun fact, it's actually pronounced flaccid. Yeah, I always say flaccid, even though I know that it is pronounced flaccid. It seems crazy to say flaccid. People saying that the press briefing is live, not on any of these three channels. Let's just refresh and see. Oh my God, she is live. What's going on? Here we go.
And we understand that very well. And with that, I'll take questions.
Here we go.
Yes.
To your point, the country is in crisis. There's a global pandemic that has claimed more than 100,000 lives. At least 40 million people are unemployed. There are now protests and racial tension ripping apart many cities. Where is the president? Why has he not delivered an address to the nation?
Love it.
As many of his predecessors have in a time of domestic
Antifa
crisis.
won't listen to
So the
him.
president has delivered multiple statements on this. The president, as recently as 48 hours ago, was out talking about what a tragedy the death of George Floyd was, how it has weighed on his heart, and how he encourages peace and lawfulness in our streets and peaceful protests. So he has said that repeatedly. He's made many statements to this effect, but what I would note is continual statements, as he's made day and day and day and day again, they don't stop anarchy. What stops anarchy is action, and that's what the president is working on right now.
To that point about the anarchists, you said this morning that the president is focused right now on rooting out Antifa. George Floyd did not die in Antifa custody. He died in police custody. What's the president doing to reform policing tactics and excessive use of force by police?
Yeah, so it's an important question for sure. And this president, if you look
Which
at the
she won't
actions
be
his
answering.
DOJ has taken, there's a civil rights investigation into the death of Ahmaud Arbery. There's a civil rights investigation into the death of George Floyd. It is a tragedy what we saw. I mentioned to you that the president was extremely upset when he saw that video.
Very upset.
And he continues to, the DOJ continues to pursue those charges. And he's recognized injustices for a long time since he was a candidate. He talked about Sandra Bland and what a terrible video that was too. So he recognizes injustices where they are, but at the same time, he also recognizes that we can't allow organized groups like Antifa to commit some of the heinous acts that we've
This
seen.
is really not about Antifa.
John.
Kayleigh, in his call with the governors, the president said that he had put General Milley in charge of all this. What does that mean?
Yeah, so
Joint Chiefs of Staff in charge of policing American streets. What did he mean?
So I'm not going to get ahead of any actions that will be announced, but what I will say to you is this, that he has had two briefings today with Secretary Esper and AG Barr, and General Milley was there. And there will be
Militarization.
additional federal assets deployed across the nation. There will be a central command center in conjunction with the state and local governments that will
Wow.
include
They
General
may be-
Milley,
they may be
Secretary Esper,
militarizing.
and AG Barr. But I won't go any further in announcing what actions.
Oh my
Explain
God.
what the president meant when he told the governors, I have put General Milley in charge. What does that mean? Because that sounds like a total break here. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being in charge of a domestic issue.
And ensuring that, as the president has said, and this has been taken out of context, by the way, that our streets are
Well, give us the
dominated
context
with
then,
a
Kayleigh.
police force and with a National Guard presence. So that, let me explain a little bit about how this works. If there's a peaceful
Just answer the
protest,
question.
police will form a line. And what we've seen are those lines have been overwhelmed by massive protests that have turned into riots, the peaceful protests to be distinguished from the riots we've seen. And when those lines are overwhelmed, law enforcement gets on the defense. So what the president has said is he wants to dominate the streets
Right.
with National Guard, with a police presence. And what studies have shown, as General Milley noted,
Studies.
he was in that governor's call, and his points all pertain to the National Guard. And he noted that there are several studies that when there's an overwhelming National Guard presence,
Right.
it actually de-escalates the situation and causes less civil unrest. So General Milley
I'd
has
love to
really
see
been
those
on
studies.
point in talking about the National Guard, the effectiveness, and ensuring that they're utilized to great effect across the country.
So in other words,
Out of context, because I mean, I have the exact
the,
quote.
the
He's
chairman
very
of the Joint Chiefs is now running domestic law enforcement. Okay, got it.
in charge.
No, I wasn't suggesting that quote was out of context. The dominate. I've seen some networks that
He
have
didn't ask
talked
about
about
that, Kayleigh.
dominating
He
protesters,
asked
and
about
I've been
being
around
in
the
charge.
president all day. Anytime he's used the word dominate, it was with regard to dominating the streets and ensuring that we have peace in our streets. Yes. Yes, Charlie.
So again, the question remains, what exactly is the general in charge of here?
Taking action against looters and some of the violent elements in the protests that we've seen. Why isn't he also supplementing that message by calling on these people to remain calm, to go home, to not destroy property, businesses, so on?
Yeah, he has done that repeatedly. Look, he talked
Oh.
about understanding the pain that people are feeling, and he does understand that pain. He's talked several times about the right to peacefully protest, and I've seen some of these peaceful protests, some of these sit-ins, and it's a real shame when you
Sit-ins.
have anarchy and anarchists come in, and you have Antifa come in, and it really dilutes the message of the protesters, and it's a legitimate reason.
Antifa is not a major force at these things. There are people under the guise of Antifa, and they're wreaking havoc, but they keep focusing on Antifa's why no one can do anything. Antifa's why Trump won't address the nation.
Is he traveling on Friday? Is he going to Maine?
He still plans on going to Maine. I haven't heard any other changes to that effect. Yeah. We just.
Thank you.
I like your mask. That's really
Thank you.
cool.
I have a quick follow-up about police reform. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says he does not think there is systemic racism among law enforcement in the U.S. Does President Trump share that view?
Look, I think where the president stands is he does not believe, he fundamentally rejects the idea that these egregious actions of these 4 Minnesota officers are representative of our police force as a whole.
Not the question.
Most of our officers in this country are good, hardworking men and women who work every day to police our streets. He's recognized cases of injustice. I noted Sandra Bland back when he was in the primary. I've noted more recently Ahmaud Arbery and then George Floyd. So he recognizes these injustices. He puts a focus on them, but he also recognizes our valiant police officers who have taken to the streets each and every night over the last 6 nights and protected our communities.
And on Antifa, can you explain what the legal authority the president is for designating Antifa as a terrorist
Yes,
organization?
beautiful
and
question.
Can you also talk about why he does not want to label white supremacist groups that are domestically
That's a
located
perfect
as
question.
terrorist organizations as well?
So let me address the first part about legal authority.
We'll do
Title
both.
18, Section 2331 allows that the term, it defines domestic terrorism as involving acts dangerous to human life that appear intended to influence the policy of a government, and other elements are laid out, and it allows the Department of Justice, when utilizing this statute, to invoke greater investigatory authority and to invoke harsher penalties. I would note that the Justice Department has in the past used domestic terrorism in consultation with acts of white supremacy or what were racially motivated acts. Like in April 2020, a Florida man pled guilty to threatening an African-American Charlottesville City Council candidate. And at that time, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force was utilized. Same in the case of February 2020.
She's saying that there are times that the fact that the Joint Terrorism Task Force was involved in a prosecution is very different than Trump designating the perpetrator a domestic terrorist. This is only the dumbest people would fall for this bullshit.
Any white nationalist groups as terrorist organizations?
It has been used. I explained how in this case that domestic terrorism will be used as a way that the crime is prosecuted. It's
not
a prosecutorial method, and it was utilized in the same exact way with regard to white supremacy.
Trump's not saying it as a prosecutorial tool. He's just designating the group.
Is he suggesting that they should be charged as well as the officer who's already been charged, the other 3? And also on Antifa, can you explain a little bit about how would he know, or how is he talking about how you would identify members of Antifa?
Right.
Since they're a very loose organization, it would be very difficult to tell who is part of Antifa.
Well,
so first, I was just on the call with the president where he expressed his dismay with those 3 officers who watched. I'll leave it to the state to pursue those charges if they decide to. It was the state that pursued the initial charge, but the president has expressed his complete dismay with those actions.
Right.
With Antifa, I do think it's important to note that they are a big element of this protest. AG Barr has noted that. Ambassador O'Brien has noted that. We have ample evidence that DOJ has received indicating that Antifa is responsible for that unrest. But as to exactly how Antifa is identified, that would be more of a question.
They certainly could be responsible for unrest, but they are not the majority out there.
Does the president have authority to deploy forces across the country beyond the National Guard?
He does, and look, we're looking at every tool in the federal toolkit available to us. You know, ideally, this would have been resolved at the state level. The states, after all, have the police power embedded in the 10th Amendment, and it is their responsibility to patrol their streets. But you're right to say that there are many federal authorities, including the one you cited, available to us.
Did you bring this up with the governors in the phone call today?
The focus of the call with the governors was really the National Guard, not that specific tool in the toolkit that you mentioned, but the National Guard and how it should be utilized much stronger than it's currently being utilized. Yes, I will go to, let's see, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Following up on what John was asking earlier, Governor Whitmer, she said she found the president's call today deeply disturbing And she said the president told the governors they need to put it down or they would be overridden. So what, I mean, is there a specific authority he's using? Because as you know, Posse Comitatus really prevents the use of the army.
Yeah,
put
you're
down
not gonna
domestic
get an answer
insurrection
to
of
that.
any kind.
Yeah, I don't know why Governor Whitmer would be dismayed at the president telling governors to do their job. It is
Oh, my
their
goodness.
responsibility to police their streets.
Trump
they
deserves
have
to
the
lose
police
Michigan
power
so
embedded in the
badly.
Constitution.
So
They
badly.
have quite clearly, many of them, failed to do their job. Look at the scenes we have seen. And it's gotten to the point where today the president has said, enough is enough. You know, there are tools I can use, namely deploying National Guard.
And tweeting.
Many others that Steve cited one, the Insurrection Act. It's one of the tools available. Whether the president decides to pursue that, that's his prerogative. Right now, we're looking at a focus on the National Guard. That's where it currently stands. And, you know, there's a distinction between the National Guard and military forces in the street.
This
I would
is
note the National Guard.
absolutely awful. You know, the last 24 hours, we saw more cooperation between protesters and law enforcement. And were it not for stuff like we're going to put the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in charge and scale up the military response, we could be de-escalating. We could be productively de-escalating. My fear is the exact opposite will happen tonight.
National Guard on the street or
I
200,000 right now?
won't put a number on it. I think it's incumbent on governors to look at the situation. You know, a case in Texas might not merit the same thing as, you know, New York City. So he's encouraging the governors to up those levels, but there's not a specific number that he has in mind. David.
Kayleigh, there is a perception that the president is hiding in the bunker on the racial protest issue. He was literally put in a bunker on Friday night by the Secret Service.
Indeed.
I mean, would you agree that he is hiding out on this issue, and is that a good
No,
posture to be
absolutely
in?
not.
I would not agree
She
with
would
that
not
at
agree
all.
with
Look,
that,
I
no.
was on the phone with the president at least half a dozen times yesterday, and every time I talked to him, he was telling me about a different action he had taken, whether it was talking to a governor about this or a foreign leader about ventilators. This
Imagine
president
those
has been leading. He
ventilators.
met with generals yesterday. He's each and every moment
They
taking
spoke very strongly on the phone, and they talked about ventilators.
streets where the governors have failed. He's stepped in. He's acting. He's hard at work. You've heard from him on this issue any number of times, and he's working because that's the job of the president, is to keep this country safe.
Well, we haven't heard him on camera that much. Is he going to give some kind of speech or a specific event about, you know, all these disturbances
No.
in hundreds of cities?
No,
I really
no,
think that that's a misnomer in the media. You know, it was really appalling, some of the coverage I saw, like the New York Times yesterday.
Yeah, this is not the type of president who improves things by giving speeches, so we are going to have him tweet instead.
They made a cursory mention of his remarks at Space Force, most of which, at least half of which, pertain to George Floyd. There was a Washington Post article with an egregious headline about Trump staying silent. He hasn't been silent on this. I have a whole list of his remarks there, and instead, paragraph 23, they note, oh wait, we're contradicting our own headline. The president did in fact make remarks. Contrary to the silent headline, you had Don Lemon on CNN saying at 9:38 p.m. on Saturday night, the president's been silent.
Right.
Ironic-
This is all about what Don Lemon said at 22 minutes to 10 p.m. last night. That's what really this all hinges on.
You had CNN double down the next day, Sunday afternoon, saying the president was silent. And, you know, I don't want to bore you with reading out all of his statements, but it sounds like
Then
I should
don't.
read a few. Like the president saying it's a grave tragedy that filled Americans all over the country with horror, anger, and grief. And I stand before you as a friend and ally to every American seeking justice. He said, I understand the pain the people are feeling. I can go on, but I would just be repeating what the president has already said. Because make no mistake, this president has not been silent. And at this moment, he is acting to protect this country from the lawlessness we saw just out here
No
in
one
Lafayette
believes that,
Park last
Kayleigh.
night. Yes.
In a particularly egregious act, St. John's Church, Church of the Presidents, was targeted last night. Graffiti all over, set on fire. What is the president's reaction to that, please?
It's hurtful, honestly. I think it's hurtful on
hurt.
a number of levels.
He's
Look,
hurt, 'cause
the
he's so
VA was
religious, the
defaced.
president.
Literally, the word veteran spray painted out of the placard in front of the department.
That guy's tan suit was so disrespectful, by the way.
Memorial defaced. How does that make much sense? The place where the March on Washington began, that momentous occasion in the history of civil rights, that memorial was defaced last night. That doesn't honor the legacy of George Floyd. It doesn't. And certainly not the burning of St. John's Church.
Yeah.
Look, St. John's, I think it's important to go through a little bit of this, but Reverend John C. Harper was the St. John's rector many centuries ago, at least decades, centuries and a few decades ago. And here's what he was told. He was told he needed to close St. John's because he couldn't leave it open for the March on Washington because, quote, it might be a bloodbath. But he stood boldly. He stood boldly and he stood on the side of justice. And on the day the March on Washington...
Imagine being so prepared for bullshit that you have a page of historical events to read from when the questions are, where the hell is the president? Like, it's not she was reminded of this story. She planned to read a page of random history to not answer actual questions about what Trump is doing.
Church that was burning last night. Here is what they said, taking that bold stance to support Martin Luther King. They said this church building is open as it has always been, so all who want to worship here. The ministry of this parish is extended to any who seek it. Our fellowship with one another has no limitations whatsoever. That church supported the bold civil rights moment of the March on Washington.
Oh my God.
Which began at the Lincoln Memorial. That doesn't honor the legacy of George Floyd.
She can rap on this.
It
and go
doesn't
out
further the
high.
cause. And those are violent anarchists, Antifa, who are taking advantage of the pain of people, the pain of the peaceful protesters. It's inexcusable, and we have to stand as one America against the burning of the church and the defacement of the Lincoln Memorial. Chanel.
Oh God, not
Is it
Chanel.
possible that DC will be placed under martial law in order to protect these national monuments from further destruction? And second, under the Civil Rights Act of '68, will this administration investigate either members of Congress or political organizations who are funding or tied to Antifa moving forward?
Yeah, you know, on Antifa, I think at this point we're pursuing the domestic terrorism angle. That's what the DOJ has decided. And what was your first question was about martial law?
The first one was
To
bullshit.
protect national monuments in DC.
Yes, so I have not heard that discussed. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Can you confirm a phone call earlier today between Presidents Trump and Putin? And if so, considering what the president said to governors later in the day, did he ask President Putin for advice on how to quell unrest in his own
Not going to
country?
tell us.
I don't have any details on that call. I wasn't a part of it, I'm not entirely certain what was discussed, but the call did take place. Yes.
Does the president regret using phrases like when the shooting starts, the looting starts, the shooting starts, and phrases like vicious dogs? Is he considering
He
apologizing?
loves those phrases.
So the president on the looting point, he was taken wildly out of context. Twitter, it's interesting to watch. I've seen multiple instances of real incitement of violence on Twitter, but
by
they've
Trump.
never penalized
That's
those
right, by
users.
Trump.
Like, for instance, Iran. We've seen horrific tweets from the Iranian regime about the elimination of the Zionist regime, to quote them, and that was never flagged. Interesting that their gut instinct was to flag the president, and they did so in an accurate way. The president very clearly laid out what he meant by that tweet, that looting leads to shooting, and we have seen the unfortunate killing of one person in Minneapolis. There were 7 people shot in a St. Louis riot a few nights ago, and the president clearly laid out what he meant, but it is interesting to watch the gut instinct of Twitter to go ahead and label
Question was,
what
does
the
Trump
president
regret saying
said as
some of these
somehow
things?
inciting violence, which it absolutely was not. But look, I want to say this. We cannot let violence and we cannot let looting and a few bad actors divide us as an American people. The American
It's
spirit
funny, before she said the protests have been taken over by Antifa everywhere, and that's why this is all about Antifa. Now she says, really, it's just a few bad actors.
some things that we haven't seen, and I think it's important for the American people to see them. And Judd, I'm going to call for that soundbite now of some video that I think it's very important for us all to watch.
Oh, no.
We want to be with y'all for real. So I took my helmet off and laid the batons down.
Yeah, this guy's great.
I
It
want
has
to make
nothing
this
to
a
do with
parade,
Trump.
not a protest. Come on. Let's walk. Not 1 ounce of damage. Nobody's arrested. Nobody got hurt. This is the way it's supposed to be.
This has nothing to do. These are great images, and I played some of them on my show today. This has nothing to do with Trump's leadership at all. It just has nothing to do with it.
My grandfather goes back home. I don't want them to be hurt. Don't hurt them no more. I love you, man.
I love you, man. I know you're doing great today. I got to see you now. That's the way you get your ass looking today. I love you.
Louisville, a human chain protecting an officer separated from his unit.
We're here with you. All right? Okay?
Trump's so great, right, that these things happen. It's like, how stupid do you have to be?
We've seen examples of police protecting protesters and protesters embracing police, and it's been beautiful to watch, though those images have not been played all that often. And I
They're
just
all
want to
over the
leave you with a
internet, Kayleigh.
quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that we must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools.
That's
Thank
it. Thank you. Get the hell out of here. Yep. Gotta go. Gotta go. Gotta go. Really, really stunning stuff, guys. I mean, just incredible that even counts as a press briefing. Absolutely unbelievable. Thanks to everybody who jumped in on the stream. I really, really appreciate it. So many of you signed up and grabbed memberships. I want to say thanks to Pat Osborne, who was number 5. Ozzy Osbourne, number 6. Very much appreciate that. Patricia Betzold is number 7. Also, Alan Otley grabbed a membership on my website. Jan Ove Gregor was new member number 9. I would be remiss if I forgot about Joanne Sharp, new member number 10. Also, Angel Melendez and Matthias Hummel, all taking advantage of the coupon code 2020 now. So appreciate everybody who joined me. I do plan on some protest streaming, but I do need material for what should my source streams be. Local news will immediately trigger copyright strikes against my channel. So if folks want to help me out with some reliable, just regular people who are streaming from protests, I'm glad to jump on and do some of that coverage. In the meantime, please remember, if you're watching me on Facebook, hit the like button. If you're watching on Twitch, make sure you're following my channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, of course, hit that subscribe button. I'll be back with you guys very, very soon.